Hey there, welcome to another episode of Hooks and Ladders, where we talk about songwriting and in all its glorious forms. My name is Blair Packham,
My name is Allister Bradley.
and the two of us are going to talk with our special guest today, Gord Deppe from the Spoons. Now, the Spoons were an '80s band, heavily identified with the '80s, but they continue on to this day, which is really exciting. They're releasing stuff all the time, anniversary records, but also a latest project which is called Echoes, which is a bunch of other people covering Spoons songs. I think it's really exciting that Gord Deppe is still in the game, so to speak. But what I want to know, Gord, is, are you writing new material? And when you do, how much does your past work affect what you write now?
Oh, of course, yeah, of course we're writing. I have to say, during COVID, I have not been inspired very much to do anything musical, really. I've been doing some long distance kind of writing with other people, which is not related to the Spoons at all. But yet, no, you can't help but, show where you came from. But I'm not stuck in the '80s. I don't try to say, well, let's try to copy the Arias Symphonies record, or let's try to write another song like Nova Heart. I kind of like to leave that behind. But we have those flavors we can't get away from, which is probably a good thing, because a lot of young bands have those '80s things going on, right? So we kind of sound like some band that's got a bit of '80s vibe to it, but because we were from there, right? But not everybody knows that outside the country. Yeah, so it's in there. I'm not stuck in it, like I said, but when you've been doing it, how long? 40 something years now. So it's in the DNA, right? You can't get rid of it. But I like to stretch out and work with other people who are a lot younger or don't understand the '80s, and just force myself to leave that comfort zone.
Yeah, it makes total sense. The '80s, any era always goes through a period when it's sort of snickered at. Usually the next decade or the decade after that. But then it starts to become cool again. And I think the '80s have really risen again. Which is of course good news for me, as well. But how about when things were not, the '80s were not so cool.
Oh,
really.
yeah. Oh, I remember that very well. When the '90s started, I thought that was the end of it. Nobody would ever care again. I remember having some demos that I was going to send out of my new project, because I was a guitar player. I was okay, right? It was the keyboard players that were in trouble and those kind of guys. I like guitar bands that were coming out of Manchester and stuff. So I had some demo tapes. You know what people told me? Just put it in a brown paper bag. Don't tell anybody that you're from the Spoons. It was like a bad thing, right? So I had to sort of, I wasn't embarrassed about it, but I had to hide the fact for at least 5 years, because it was, I think, as soon as '95 that there was a little inkling that the '80s was sort of okay again. It started to build, and I thought it was just a fad, maybe a couple of years, but it's still building in some parts of mid-America. It's still, retro '80s is back huge. Yeah, it wasn't good, but because I was a guitar player, I gravitated to, Matthew Sweet and like British bands that were, I can't even, the list is really long. I wasn't going, oh my God, the '80s is over. What am I going to do? Right. But in the '70s, I had bands right before the '80s. And then before that, Sandy and I were in prog rock kind of bands, that were not very '80s sounding. So it's not like that's all I know, So yeah. So
Yeah.
it was scary at first, because I thought everything that we built up over 10 years didn't matter at all anymore, But then it was kind of exciting, because I thought, well, you know what? I'm going to show people I can rock. That I can, I've got a Marshall. I've got, guitar is very underplayed in the Spoon stuff. And people are always surprised at my guitar playing, because I play what's necessary. And I also play guitar with Flock of Seagulls now. People say, oh, that was amazing. I say, yeah, all three notes, because you have to play within the parameters of that band, right? But whenever I get the chance to stretch out and work with other bands and really show my playing, I always go, wow, I had no idea. So, and same with songwriting, they had no idea that I could break out of that drum machine synth sequence vibe.
It's funny you mentioned prog rock, because as a thing that you and Sandy did, because the Spoon songs are really progressive rock. You have the '80s production, which is great, but the songs are really quite adventurous in terms of the harmonics, the chords, just the chord choices, the melodic choices.
No, look at Arias Symphonies. It's like a symphony, right? It actually is. And it's one of the songs like Gowan did on the remake, and he totally gown that song. It's probably got 20 chords in it. Now I try to write songs with 2 or 3 chords. That's plenty, But you're right. Some of that prog rock stuff came across, and I never thought we would break out of that until New Wave, because there were bands coming across from England like Ultravox and Crushed Maneuvers and all this stuff. And I'm going, wait a second, there's some middle ground here. It's got the same moodiness, some of the same keyboard sounds. Remember the Taurus bass pedals that we all had in the 80s, like Rush had, and then all of a sudden, here are the 80s and Police are using them, and then they end up being the big fat synth sound in Nova Heart. And that's a sort of a remnant of our prog rock days, a lot of those sounds and things. So it was comfortable, because I never listened to mainstream that much growing up. Like while my friends were listening to the Beach Boys and stuff like that, I was listening to Genesis and King Crimson and that kind of thing. And then when the 80s came, same thing. I kind of went to the darker stuff, the Gary Newmans and the Flying Lizards and the whatever.
Yeah.
So what was the question about songwriting? Songwriting is in there somewhere.
Well, it came from a place of, given that you have, a significant fan base that followed you throughout the 80s and beyond, when you sit down to write something new, do you think, what do they want to hear? Do they want to hear more of what they love of that vintage, or do you consciously make any effort to try to be different than that?
Not really. I think whenever you try to do things consciously, and when you write, that's a bad thing. Unless you're a staff writer for a label or something, or for another artist, if it doesn't flow naturally. And I found, in the old days, you would, like you, Blair, you would have a schedule. You would record an album. First you write, spend a year writing, recording, and then you spend a year, making videos and touring, and then next year again writing. So it was a kind of a system or a pressure on you to create. Whereas now we just make a record when we think we have a good bunch of songs, So we put one out, I think, in 2011, and then the last album of all original new stuff was 2019, New Day, New World, just before all hell broke loose and stuff. But it was perfect because you got to live life, and I think that's important too. When you're in a rut to write, it's sort of like systematic, whereas when it's all of a sudden you've experienced life, it's just a little thing coming up. You're still there. You experience life a little bit, whether it's 5 or 10 years, then you got a whole new perspective on things that comes out in your writing, and that's important. I mean, everything in your life should come through in that recording, even the studio, whether it's in, Guelph, Ontario, or in London, England, or New York City. It's like, there should be that vibe that oozes into it. If not, why bother going there? So time is important, location, state of mind, we all go through things, I think the 80s, you don't have time to really think of anything beyond touring and hair products and stuff like that. Whereas now, we've all lived life. We've had families. We have more perspective on the world. There's a lot of stuff going on. So that all should come through, even in a love song. I always believe that the great writers, on one level, they can be taken as a love song or something very frivolous, but there's got to be something subtext that comes, is in there. And a good example of that is Nova Heart. People think, what's just a love song? Nova Heart? No, it's more of a spiritual, all-encompassing sort of, future for everybody. When everything is sort of done and all the things that we thought were important weren't really that important. Yeah. So I like songs like that have meaning on different levels like that, and I think all the great bands do that, but on purpose or not. I
was going to ask you, out of curiosity, which song you might say is your favorite from your classic period, but I get the sense you're going to say it's probably Nova Heart.
I never get tired of that one. It was so wrong for its time. I just found something in my basement of all these things, and there was an old Chum album chart, and we're in the top 10, I think number 4, with like Queen, Led Zeppelin, AC/DC. How does it sound like Nova Heart get up there? That doesn't make any sense. But there was something about it that was really right for the time, but still never had a place really anywhere because it was odd and sort of this freakish little thing. But I just sort of love it because of that, And,
it's a great song.
And I've done at your shows, with acoustic guitar. We've done it with the symphony orchestra. We've done it all different ways. I've done it with the banjo player doing the guitar solo. We did this thing on the radio. Like, it just can be done any way, and it still comes across.
It's funny you mentioned the my shows, and you're referring to the Bluebird North / Songbird North shows, where we take, we have artists who normally don't play in an acoustic format usually, and strip the thing down to one thing. And your songs, when you appeared, just struck me as so great and so again, ambitious harmonically and lyrically and melodically, and because they were stripped bare. Of course, I'd heard them, but they'd become like old furniture in a sense to me. Because if I heard them on the radio, it was like, yeah, Spoons, But hearing them fresh like that was really amazing to me, and you could really hear the work that went into them. I don't mean work like slaving away kind of work, but I just mean, I don't mean that it sounded labored. I just mean that you could hear the quality of the writing.
Yeah, well, I'm glad to hear that. Some people didn't really see that until it was stripped down, And you were the first one that got me to do that, to be brave enough, and Gowan being there as well, which led to him doing his version of arias too. Is like, you're right, and it is like a piece of furniture, I guess, when you look at it like an old recording. Yeah, it's a piece of IKEA chair, it's an IKEA table, but when you strip it down, wait a second, there's some nice wood under there,
and beautiful design, and a lot of heart.
Well, I appreciate that. And that's another thing when I write. I really hate what comes like what's the obvious, or like, it amazes me all the time, and you can't really put them down, but all the all the hits you hear something, and he's like, it's the same thing rehashed from this other thing, and see. More power to them, because they're doing great. But I would reach a certain point and go, wait a second, that's kind of been done too many times already. And that's maybe been our fault. We've been trying to be different so much that I think now sometimes, why didn't we instead of calling it Nova Heart, why don't we call it like, something more obvious that would have maybe gotten more airplay or whatever. I just think maybe it wasn't always great to be clever or cryptic or, just a bit more straightforward, But that was our thing.
Yeah,
maybe
but it was,
because
it's who you are. It's who you are as a writer and as a person, and I think that's. I think it worked for you big time. I know what you mean. I know. Yeah. Believe me, I second guess my whole career all the time. So.
Yeah, that's what I tell people. When I was working with your song studio too, like try to be different and not normal. Those are like my mantras. Like don't try to be like the next person beside you. And everything that you are in life. Whether I was talking about. Things you go through in life, but even like the food you like, what movies like, they should all come through like a little crazy blender of your life and what you're writing, not just like the next guy,
Yeah, and also even from section to section in a song, something that I try and stress is some contrast would be nice. Sometimes people write a song and it's the same 4 chords from top to bottom, and the melody barely changes for the chorus, and sometimes that works, but most of the time that doesn't. So looking for contrast and something different, I think is a hallmark of the Spoons career and your writing.
Yeah, that's for sure. Everything's got a certain movement to it. There's like tell no lies, or it's got a little like movement where I find a lot of people when they first start writing, anyways, and some bands get away with it the whole career. They're very monotonous in their. They're saying what's up with it's like what 2 notes, and maybe then they get to the chorus. It's a little bit more, but they're counting on groove and what's a repetition and stuff like that. And again, I can't slag them because I like some of it too. It's like, but the old days of writing is you got, movement in the melodies, and you got changes, and you have drama. And right now, it's more like to be cool and monotone, like chanty.
Yeah, and low key. That's right. Yeah. Oh, those kids today.
well, in the 90s, like Nirvana's whole thing was really low and then really loud. Now it's just low.
Yeah,
it's like so. Let's get back to loud. I'm waiting for the, that's why I don't hate people like Machine Gun Kelly, because it's got this hope that guitar songs and just that kind of 80s self-indulgence and craziness will come back. There was a good side to that. There was experimentation and some feeling. I find when I watch a lot of the stuff, there's so many great singers, and artists and people, the songs that they write or they're singing, it sounds like to me like they're auditioning for the next Disney movie, princess on some movie, the soundtrack, like very very sort of very what's the word? It's like in our day, if the biggest thing in the world, maybe it was like the Osmonds and Menudo, and very copacetic, very sweet, and very easy to take. It's I miss those bands that really got me going. You know, they scared me. They got me to think. Where are they? I don't know. Hopefully they're coming back.
Oh yeah, there's always a reaction. You know, there always will. Well, we got to wrap this one up. But thank you so much, Gord, for talking about your songwriting with us, and good luck with the new album. It sounds very exciting.
Thank you.
And
looking forward to it.
Look forward to talking to you soon. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.